Welcome to the Healthy Christian Leader. I'm Dwight Habermehl. Come join me in the living room for some honest conversations. I'll be talking to guests about their journey with Christ through the joys, the challenges, and the messiness of leadership. There's always something to learn from someone's story, so let's get started. Well, welcome, friends, to the Healthy Christian Leader Show. I'm Dwight Habermehl, and I have my guest today, Tim Dickau, all the way from Vancouver. Tim, great to have you here today.
Good to be here, Dwight, with you.
Yeah, Tim is a good friend. In fact, had the privilege of being with him in Vancouver about a month ago, and we saw the work that Tim is doing. It's an amazing work there in Vancouver. In his local church, we're going to be talking about that and also some of the wider things that are going on in the city of Vancouver. And just really appreciate Tim's heart for his city and for our country here in Canada and for the local church. And Tim, so thank you for joining us. And we're going to start a conversation about becoming a church for change. But maybe you can tell us, first of all, a little bit about yourself and your journey through ministry so people get to know you as I do.
Sure. Well, thanks for welcoming me, Dwight. And good to meet all of you by video in the East Coast. It's one of my favorite parts of the country. So I started learning how to be part of the church as a kid growing up on a farm, and we were part of a church. And that was significant just to see the role that the church played in our lives and my life growing up. I, after university, went to seminary out here in Vancouver at Regent College, and then started at Grandview Church when I was 26 years old.
Wow.
To be a pastor. But I came to the churches to do an initial project to help the church reconnect with its neighborhood. Like many urban churches, it had disconnected from its neighborhood. People had moved away and the church was declining and looking at closing. And we put together a project with our denomination to see if we could help to bring more connection to the neighborhood. So I went around and said, my name's Tim. I'm with this church. What's going on here? How could we help? And then tried to help the small group that was left there. And then that started a 30-year journey of ministry there as pastor. And I'm sure we'll get into more of that. And then since then, I've left and I'm teaching part-time at one of the seminaries here. And then I lead Citygate, which is an organization which helps to develop networks of churches to work on specific issues. And we can get into that a little bit later on, too.
Well, that's amazing, Tim. We are very excited to hear about what you've been doing there in Vancouver. When pastoring Grandview, you helped the church become more missional in the neighborhood. What intentionally inspired you to that shift?
Well, I had the privilege. Two people that really influenced me during my seminary days were Tom Wright, or N.T. Wright, and his vision of Jesus being on the ground, working to bring restoration in throughout all of life, really became a vision that I brought into my work at Grandview, not knowing how to work that out, but having a sense that this is what God was calling us to do, especially in these urban contexts. And then I also had a chance to study with Ray Bakke, who is kind of urban mission specialist before his recent death and has worked all over the world. And he really helped me to put my feet on the ground and make the connections in the city and start to build the kind of relationships, broad relationships, and help the church develop those that would then enable us to respond to the needs of our neighborhood and the things that were happening around us. So I had a theological vision, but not a lot of experience knowing how to work it out. I got that learning mostly on the ground by doing it over those 30 years.
That's often how we all grow and learn is through the school of hard knocks, as they say, and the application of the things that we're taught. What practical steps can churches take to begin to understand their neighborhoods and needs?
Yeah, well, I'm going to tell you a few stories to illustrate this one, because I think this is the way that these things happen. I was talking with a woman in the park one day. We were both there with our sons, and I had gotten to know her a little bit at the park, and we started talking about the places for parents in the neighborhood, and she says, there's really no place for parents to gather in the neighborhood. And I says, well, we've got this church building, this church hall. We could offer a place to meet together. And so with her and some others that we were connecting with, we started Parents Morning Out, and it was just a Wednesday morning with muffins and coffee and a chance for parents to come. And I ended up being the first childcare person. My wife led it. In fact, at one point we had 10 little boys, all boys, in the childcare, and I would take them to the park. And then, I figured if I got 9 back, I was doing pretty good, sort of thing. So it was before the days of liability policy. But it was a great way to develop relationships in the neighborhood. And a number of those parents became followers of Christ and became part of the church. And that kind of launched us on that path with families. We had built a relationship. I had met one of the refugee agencies just around the corner from our church building, and I asked them, like, what are the needs of refugee claimants, and where are they landing when they come to Vancouver? And they started to give me an awareness of what was going on. And then there was a whole group of people from Burma that arrived, and they were looking to connect with the church for some help, and we received them. And that started us on a journey with that whole group of people, and responding to their needs, developing a little small group with them. I initially led that, and I couldn't find anybody else to help me, and it was a challenging group to lead because it was on a Saturday night when I was, could be working on my sermon, or if I was done watching a hockey game. But instead I was out there meeting with them, and we had to translate into 2 languages. It took a long time to talk together, but I left that always feeling like the air was back in my lungs, and just responding to their gratitude for meeting with them together. And then eventually some other people got involved in that small group. A couple of them became leaders in our church, and one of them has now become a pastor of a multicultural church. So again, building those connections and responding to those needs is another one. We had a lot of people that at one point that we were noticing were underemployed or unemployed, and had barriers to employment, maybe physical health problems, mental health problems. And so we wondered how we could care for those folks. And so we actually did a little study of programs that people had started. We got a little $2,000 grant, and somebody did a study for us, and a woman who as part of the church, had a degree in community economic development. And then we brought people together to look at that study, and we started a little employment committee trying to help people find jobs and write resumes and so forth. But out of that, we got another grant, and then we started what became Just Work, which is a social enterprise developer, businesses that have a social mandate. And we started with a pottery studio that had been started in the basement of our church, and we started to employ people to make pottery. And eventually we developed a catering business out of the church commercial kitchen, and also a renovation business. And we employed folks that often, some of them were on disability and could earn up to $800 or $1,000 a month without reducing their benefits. Most of them would earn that, and it was just a significant, like seeing the flowers bloom, to see the people come back to life. So it was those relationships in the neighborhood we were developing, hearing people's stories, then starting to think, how can we respond to those stories in ways that can come alongside people? And those led to the start of a number of initiatives out of the church.
No, I particularly appreciated when I was in Vancouver seeing the initiatives you're doing in work creation and entrepreneurship. As a business leader myself in marketplace ministry, it particularly touched my heart. And just really exciting to see what's going on there. Were attitudes within the congregation ever a barrier to reaching and integrating neighbors? And How did you ensure the church was safe and welcoming for new people as they came?
Really good question. Let me tell you another story to respond to that one. So I was at a neighborhood services team meeting. This was a meeting, a monthly gathering of people working in education, health, social services, talking about the needs of the neighborhood. And at that meeting, someone said to me, Tim, what are the churches doing for the increasing number of homeless people on Commercial Drive? And I said, oh, nothing that I'm aware of. And so I went back to our church that Sunday, told that story, said, if anybody's interested in talking about this, let's meet after worship. About 15 people gathered. And we did some research and then brought a proposal to have a meal once a week on Thursday nights with an overnight stay and breakfast the next morning. And there was some good hard questions about that from people within the congregation, like how is this going to affect our building? How are we going to deal with safety concerns with people? So we worked through all those questions, good questions. But at the same time, we said we don't want the barriers and the fears that we have to be the thing that stops us from providing a place of welcome. And so we worked through those questions. I think we did it well. And then we started our meal and overnight shelter. And that became such an important part. That lasted for 25 years, that meal, and became
Wow.
such an important meeting space. What sociologists call third spaces, and that wasn't a public space, totally wasn't a private space. It was kind of in between, and a place where people could gather from across economic barriers and develop relationships together and overcome fears and stereotypes that we might have of one another. And that was such an important meeting space, out of which a number of other initiatives grew, including a drop-in center and eventually housing over top of our parking lot. And so that need to provide safety and welcome was something we worked at providing both by taking people and individuals seriously. I think that was an important part of that. Welcome.
Well, and Tim, you mentioned it really briefly there and very humbly, but that housing project over a parking lot, that's an impressive project. When we had a chance to be in Vancouver together and go through the building, some 30 units that are beautiful, beautiful units. 1 and 2 bedroom units, and the best of facilities, a beautiful common area, beautiful welcoming entry, elevator going to each of the floors. That's an amazing accomplishment for a local church in the core of Vancouver. And for those who are listening, it's not a mega church endeavor. This is a local church, a typical local church in the heart of the city of Vancouver. An impressive project. Maybe you could tell us a little bit more about how all that unfolded and what it became.
For sure. So one of the things that started to emerge, and again, probably the easiest is to tell a story here, is we started to attract people that were living in the neighborhood, and we had some people that were interested in developing a communal living type situation. We looked at buying a older adults residence up the street that we were doing services at occasionally, and yet when the owner went to sell it, the city required seismic upgrading. So we used to joke that they didn't mind if it fell down on older adults. They didn't want it falling down on younger people, but it wasn't, if you're in urban planning, it's not quite that simple. But anyways, it really made the cost prohibitive. And then we started to gain a vision from a couple from our church about developing communal housing in geographic proximity to one another. And so the church owned 2 houses beside the church that we were living in one of them. We moved just about a block and a half away. Those became our first 2 community houses. And then other people started sharing this vision of either moving close to one another or sharing their home with one or two other folks. And so that became part of our vision. A lot of that was driven by a desire to have more of a shared life that the gospel calls us to in a particular neighborhood. But as time went on, increasingly economics was also driving that, as because house prices going through the roof in Vancouver here, people couldn't often afford to live on their own. And we had some resources then to help people to live together. But out of that, and the fact that our drop-in center that we had started needed to move, and we bought a lot next door to our parking lot with the intention of using that house there. That didn't work out for a whole variety of reasons, and we had to eventually tear that house down and develop a community garden. But that started a visioning process at the church where we said, what could we do with this land? And already then housing was emerging as a key need. And so we started a journey of initially partnering with another organization that said, no, I think you need to do this yourself because you have a unique vision of mixed community. And so we developed a foundation that oversaw the development and fundraising to develop this building. And it took 15 years. And so it was a long journey. And it's part of the reason that we now have developed Wayfinder Developments, an organization that to help churches do this in a lot shorter time. And it's also why I've developed this national coalition around people trying to rethink and imagine church properties. And so we have a conference coming up in Toronto in May, and we're hoping to come to Halifax next year. And so there's something to look forward to if we can make that happen with you, Dwight, and some others there.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Tim, it's really impressive to me the way the church has reached in and connected with the community, loved the community, became integrated and part of the community, and then saw individuals coming to Jesus, faith in Christ, and growing and maturing. I love it. It's a full and complete and beautiful picture of the gospel. How can we find creative ways to share the good news with our neighbors who are not in church on Sunday?
We developed what I would describe as a thicker shared life in a neighborhood that was more porous with our neighbors. So there were small groups and groups of people meeting regularly, and then they would open that up to neighbors, and the relationships would develop, and faith would be shared in the course of those relationships. Let me give you one really neat example. There was a community house just a few blocks from the church where we've had a number of people move through that house over the years. And they were right next to an apartment building. In between was a courtyard. And there were 2 or 3 folks from the apartment building that were also part of the church. Well, they started to gather people in their courtyard, especially during the warmer months, and every second Saturday night, and they would invite people to do the Ignatian questions of examine, like what's brought you life this week and what's taken life from you. And people would sit around in a circle and do this. People who'd never been to church in their lives before, sharing, and then they would have prayer together. Well, this was phenomenal that this was taking place in a courtyard with people who were not connected to church at all. And so some of those folks became followers of Christ, and that was such a significant way of sharing faith within the context of living close by one another. And that's probably how most people became Christians, living in a community house. We had that experience ourselves. We've lived with 35 people over the last 30 some years and saw people come to faith just by sharing life with us and seeing how the gospel works itself out in our culture. I think all the ways that our church was involved in the neighborhood in the kinds of programs we ran also gave us credibility. So a couple stories there. One woman came to our church not long before I finished and said, I would just want you to know I'm an atheist. but I'm here because I got to figure out what's going on here, because there's something going on here that's
Wow.
different than everywhere else. And then about 6 months after she'd been participating in worship, she says, maybe I didn't have the God thing quite right. And I met her downtown about 6 months after that, and she introduced me as her pastor to her
Wow.
workmate.
Wow. Wow.
And
Wow.
so just to see that slow kind of movement, and that's the, we saw that over and over again, that the gospel makes sense in the as you develop relationships in the speed of trust. So as we develop trust with people, both corporately as a church that was loving its neighborhood and making a difference, and then by the personal relationships of sharing life in a neighborhood. And again, when our church was at its largest, had about 300 people in our two congregations, but about at one point 70% lived within walking distance of the church. So it was very much a parish kind
Mm,
of feel to it.
that's amazing. We had the privilege, or I had the privilege of meeting Michael when we were at the house. And I am so in love with that project and so excited about it because, $600 or $700 a month is what people are paying in the middle of the most expensive city in the world, where rents are $2,500, $3,000, $4,000 a month, and it's affordable rent. And Michael had a stroke, and Michael's whole world collapsed around him. He's left today without being able to fully communicate, but he would often text and write, and the joy on his face was really impacting me when you and I went to a coffee shop that was the Grounds, I think it was called there, and it was probably a few blocks away from the church. And Michael came by, and he was so excited to see us. And you could just see the joy in his face and the appreciation for the relationships and the friendship. There was purpose, there was security. And
Yep.
Michael's been there a good number of years now, has he not?
He's been there really since the beginning when it opened in 2019. Or 2017. So he's been there, yep, 8 years. So, and I knew him in the neighborhood before he had a stroke. We often went to the same cafe together, and so would talk. And then when he had the stroke, Cohere was just about to open. I said, Michael, they have some accessible suites that would fit you in a wheelchair, and it could be a good place for you. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, Dwight, when I asked him when he was in his apartment, I says, "Is this a good place to live?" And he goes, "Like, come on, Tim, this is like, come on, this is gold."
And it is beautiful. I'm so excited. What advice would you have for a leader who wants to steer their church community towards greater neighborhood service and outreach?
Well, a few things that I would say. One is we need a theological vision of God's Spirit at work in our neighborhoods, drawing people to God's own self, drawing people back to their vocation to be image bearers of God. And that confidence and hope that God's Spirit is work is what enables us to take the long road of building relationship and trust and loving our neighbors. Secondly, I'd say it's the listening posture of learning about what the issues are that people are facing and responding to those real issues. It's a temptation for churches to like read some demographics and assume sometime about what the needs are, and to start developing programs in ways that aren't connecting with people, and then we kind of wonder why they don't come. And so um just that listening posture that comes with the relationships, and then learning about, well, how could we come alongside one another around this issue to support and encourage you. And then that's how so many of the initiatives that we developed emerged. And my experience too is that people are looking for purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And that includes people that are sitting in the pews regularly. They want to participate in the mission of God. And so often that gets restricted to what we do in worship together, or maybe, leading a Bible study instead of, not that those are important things, but to not limit it to that, but to see the gifts of the people emerging in response to the needs of our neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And my role as pastor was often to listen to people's passions and the needs and bring people together in conversation and say, hey, you have these passions, you have these needs and issues that you're facing. How can we work together to help build a response? And that's how things often emerged. And so that convening role as pastors, community development, you might say, approach to pastor, believing that the Spirit is worked through the people to bring the gifts and passions together with the needs of our neighborhood.
Tim, I can tell that you're touching a real passion in your heart when you get onto these topics, and I know that to be true. Well, Tim Dickau from the beautiful city of Vancouver, a coast-to-coast conversation about the church and its integration and impact in local communities. What a great conversation, and about becoming a church of change. Tim, we're going to have another conversation here in a little bit that people can connect to in the next podcast, which is striving for greater church health. And I'm looking forward to that conversation. So we'll see you next time, friends, on The Healthy Christian Leader. Well, today's conversation was fantastic, but we're not finished yet. We'll be back in the next video with the same guest with more discussion about leader health. You know the drill. Subscribe and hit that bell. Would you join us for the next episode? You can find new episodes every week in video form on the Aaron Ministry YouTube page and in audio form as the Healthy Christian Leader Show wherever you get your podcasts. Aaron Ministries is an interdenominational network of friends in ministry with a mission to foster healthy Christian leaders. Check out our website, aaronministries.com, for more resources and information on how to donate or to start a healthy Christian leader gathering in your area. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.